How did Vikings stay warm on freezing ships? That question sounds simple. The answer is going to make you rethink everything you thought you knew about these people, because the popular image is completely wrong. The image is a painted longship cutting through gray water, crew looking fierce, nobody visibly dying of cold. What the painting skips is the man in the back who cannot feel his hands, the one whose boots have been wet since yesterday, the one doing quiet mental arithmetic about whether he made a terrible career decision. There was no cabin, no stove, no heated compartment below deck where you could go to warm up and complain about the weather. The crew lived inside the weather. All of it, every hour of it, and the North Atlantic did not offer a gentle introduction. So how did they do it? The honest answer has several parts, and none of them involve secret Viking technology or supernatural cold resistance. They chose when to sail carefully. They built a clothing system around one specific material. They ate strategically. They worked in organized shifts. They got off the ship whenever the ship stopped being the safest place to be. And sometimes, despite doing everything right, they were dangerously, miserably cold anyway. Start with the timing, because this is the part people consistently underestimate. Vikings were not sailing around in January for fun. Long-distance voyages were planned around sailing seasons. In northern waters, winter meant shorter days, violent storms, sea ice in certain regions, and temperatures that turned every wave into a genuine threat. Later sources describing the Greenland route recommend specific narrow windows in summer. Baltic sailing traditions also defined a season rather than treating the ocean as permanently open for business. The simplest cold weather strategy available to any Viking sailor was to not be at sea during the worst of it. Standing inside a house during a North Atlantic winter storm is a dramatically more effective survival method than any piece of clothing ever invented. But this is not the whole story, because voyages still encountered brutal conditions. The North Atlantic can produce freezing rain, dense fog, violent wind, and near-freezing water in the middle of summer. A voyage that began in calm weather could deteriorate badly before the next coastline appeared. Raids, trade expeditions, and bad luck ignored ideal calendars. Vikings watched weather, waited for favorable winds, followed coastal routes wherever possible, and crossed open water when the odds looked survivable rather than suicidal. Choosing when not to sail was itself a form of seamanship. Now, the ship itself. A longship was designed for speed, shallow water, rowing, beaching, and moving a large crew efficiently. That open hull allowed people to handle the sail, work the oars, shift weight, and land quickly. A permanent roof would add weight, catch wind, block movement, and make the vessel far less useful in battle or sudden weather changes. The design was a deliberate trade. You get speed and versatility. You give up shelter. The crew lived with that trade every single day, which made clothing the first and most important shelter available. And here is where Vikings made a genuinely impressive set of decisions. The critical material was wool, not one enormous bearskin, not metal with climate control, wool. Specifically, carefully layered wool, worn in a system that managed heat, moisture, and wind simultaneously. Wool has a fiber structure that is almost offensively well-suited to cold, wet environments. The fibers are crimped, which means cloth traps tiny pockets of air. Those air pockets slow the movement of heat away from your body. Wool can also absorb significant moisture vapor within the fiber itself, while still feeling less wet than most plant-based fabrics. And critically, damp wool retains meaningful insulation. Not all of it. The idea that wool keeps you perfectly warm when completely soaked is exaggerated. Saturated wool gets heavy, water replaces insulating air, and wind accelerates heat loss. A person in soaking wet wool can absolutely develop hypothermia. But compared with materials that collapse against the skin and lose all insulation immediately, wool gives a sailor a margin. On the North Atlantic, margins are the difference between arriving and not arriving. A typical clothing system probably began with a linen undergarment, where linen was available, followed by woolen tunics and leg coverings, then additional wool layers, then a heavy outer cloak. Archaeological textile fragments, grave finds, and later written descriptions show real variation across time, region, wealth, and individual circumstance. There was no official uniform. The principle that mattered was layering. Several layers trap more air than one thick garment. They can be added, removed, opened, or tightened as conditions change. This flexibility solved two opposite problems that could both kill you. Too few layers and the wind strips heat away faster than your body produces it. Too many layers during hard rowing and sweat soaks the clothing from inside. Sweat in cold conditions is dangerous because your body spends heat evaporating it. Once you stop working, damp fabric combined with a hard wind can turn yesterday's heroic rowing into tonight's medical emergency. The experienced sailor managed clothing before discomfort became a crisis. Open the cloak while working hard. Close it when resting. Replace a wet layer if dry clothing is available. Do not wait until your hands stop cooperating. The outer fabric mattered enormously. Dense, tightly woven wool blocks wind and spray far better than loose cloth. Finishing techniques could fool the textile, compressing and tangling the fibers into a denser surface. Natural wool grease and deliberate treatments may have improved water resistance, though the idea that every sailor wore a perfectly waterproofed cloak goes beyond what evidence actually supports. Water-resistant is not waterproof. A dense wool cloak can shed droplets and delay saturation. It cannot negotiate indefinitely with horizontal rain. Leather had its role too. Shoes were commonly leather. Animal skins and woolen blankets served as bedding and additional insulation. Fur was available, particularly through northern trade networks, but the cinematic Viking permanently wrapped in magnificent pelts represented wealth or specific circumstance rather than standard maritime equipment. The real miracle behind all of this was not the material itself, it was the labor. Every tunic, cloak, blanket, mitten, hood, and sail required fiber to be cleaned, prepared, spun, woven, cut, and sewn. A single large woolen sail demanded an almost staggering quantity of material and time. Viking expansion across the North Atlantic depended not only on the people holding weapons, but on entire communities producing the cloth that moved and protected them. The sword gets the museum display. The spindle got civilization across the ocean. Extremities created the next serious problem. In cold conditions, the body protects its core by reducing blood flow near the skin, especially in the hands and feet. This preserves vital organs while allowing fingers to become progressively less useful. Head coverings, hoods, mittens, woolen socks, and properly fitted shoes therefore mattered enormously. A technique called null bending, using a single needle in a method distinct from modern knitting, could produce warm, flexible mittens and socks with excellent durability. Wet footwear was a constant nightmare. Water entered from spray, rain, bilge, or simply standing on a boat where dry floorboards were more aspiration than guarantee. Crews bailed constantly because even a well-built clinker vessel took on water. Spare foot coverings and drying opportunities ashore could determine whether a man retained functional toes by the end of a voyage. Then there was the most straightforward heat source on any Viking ship: other Vikings. A packed crew generated warmth continuously. A resting person produces body heat. A rowing person produces considerably more. When dozens of people occupied a narrow hull, huddling under wool and sheltering each other from wind-reduced exposed surface area, and created a warmer microclimate than any individual could manage alone. Privacy suffered dramatically. Survival approved. Rowing itself deserves attention as a heating strategy. Raising the mast, trimming the sail, hauling ropes, steering, bailing, and shifting cargo all demanded real physical effort. Muscle converts chemical energy into movement, but a significant portion of that energy becomes heat. During hard rowing, the immediate challenge could actually be overheating rather than freezing. Then the watch changed. The rower stopped. Wind crossed his damp clothing and the cold returned immediately, and with interest. This cycle explains why crew organization mattered as much as clothing. A ship could not exhaust every man simultaneously and then leave the vessel unable to function. Watches allowed part of the crew to row or sail while others rested, ate, repaired gear, or bailed. Modern crews operating reconstructed Viking ships describe shifts, severe fatigue, persistent cold, and a complete absence of personal space. Rest happened wherever the vessel allowed. The cold did not pause while you slept. Sleeping was actually one of the most dangerous periods because heat production dropped and awareness disappeared entirely. Animal skins and woolen blankets provided insulation. Dry bedding kept in chests or wrapped bundles was nearly as important as having it at all. A wet blanket is an object. A dry blanket is a survival system. Temporary shelter improved the situation when conditions permitted. Evidence from the Oseberg ship burial includes tent materials, and later texts describe tents rigged over vessels at anchor. Crews could beach a ship, lower the sail, and pitch shelter on land, but a tent aboard a ship underway in rough weather catches wind, obstructs the crew, and risks becoming airborne. So shelter was used opportunistically. At anchor in calm water, rig a covering. Beached for the night, camp beside the ship. Underway in dangerous weather, keep the vessel controllable and accept that comfort has been removed from consideration. Getting ashore was not failure. It was standard strategy. The shallow hulls of Viking ships allowed them to approach beaches and rivers that deeper vessels could not reach. Crews could pull a ship onto land, make camp, build fires, dry clothing, repair damage, collect fresh water, and sleep without the floor actively trying to roll them overboard. The North Atlantic expansion was not one blind leap from Norway to Canada. It was a chain of landfalls. Norway to Shetland, Shetland to the Faroes to Iceland, Iceland to Greenland. Each crossing was still genuinely hazardous, but land meant fire, Fire is the answer people expect to find on the ship itself. Could Vikings light one aboard? Possibly in very controlled circumstances on certain vessels, but an open cooking fire at sea creates obvious catastrophic problems. The ship is wooden, the sail and ropes are combustible, waves move hot coals unpredictably, a pot becomes a projectile. One badly timed gust converts a longship into a very fast funeral pyre. Strong evidence for routine shipboard cooking during Viking voyages is limited. The safer Viking stove was a beach. Food mattered as much as fire. Human warmth is metabolic. The body burns stored and recently consumed energy to maintain temperature. Cold exposure raises those energy demands while rowing consumes enormous amounts. A sailor who is wet, exhausted, and underfed loses the ability to produce heat at precisely the moment he needs it most. Viking provisions had to survive without refrigeration in a moving, saltwater environment. Dried fish, salted meat, preserved dairy, hard bread, butter, and grain products provided combinations of fat, protein, and carbohydrate. Fat was particularly valuable because it contains more energy per unit of weight than anything else. Butter, fatty meat, and stored animal fats packed fuel into limited space efficiently. Eating regularly kept the internal furnace operating. The lasting warmth came from calories metabolized over hours, not from the brief heat inside a bowl. Weather knowledge tied everything together. Warm clothes do not compensate for poor navigation decisions. Experienced sailors read wind, clouds, wave patterns, currents, birds, and visibility. They knew which headland created dangerous currents, which harbor offered real shelter, which promising sky was actually lying. This knowledge was cultural technology, passed between generations through practice, repeated voyages, and accumulated observation. The most important piece of warm equipment on any Viking ship may have been an experienced captain saying, simply, "We are not leaving today." Even excellent decisions failed sometimes. Storms developed faster than anyone anticipated. Sails tore, masts broke, hulls leaked. Once a man entered cold water, the situation changed completely. Near-freezing seawater removes heat from a human body far faster than cold air ever could. Heavy clothing makes swimming nearly impossible. There were no emergency suits, no rescue services, no radio. Survival depended on staying aboard, reacting immediately, and having other crew members close enough to pull someone back. That vulnerability is essential to understand. Popular history often treats a successful voyage as proof that the technology made it safe. It did not. Viking ships were extraordinary because they made dangerous journeys possible, not comfortable, never comfortable. Modern crews sailing reconstructed Viking ships describe cold, exhaustion, seasickness, poor sleep, and persistent wetness even with safety equipment and weather forecasts nearby. Remove the modern gear. Replace the forecast with observation. Replace the emergency beacon with shouting across open water. The achievement becomes clearer, but so does what it actually cost. Not every sailor made it. The sea kept the failed version of every successful route we know about. We know the crossing because somebody completed it. The ships that disappeared took their crews and most of the evidence with them. So there was no single trick, no secret, no Viking superpower. There was wool, worn in carefully managed layers. There was timing, choosing conditions rather than fighting every possible one. There was food, enough fat and calories to keep the body generating heat. There was labor, organized in shifts so the crew remained functional. There was the constant calculation of when to push forward and when to get off the water entirely. And underneath all of it, there was the accumulated knowledge of people who had been reading these particular seas for generations. They were cold. Regularly, seriously, dangerously cold. They simply built an entire system around surviving it anyway.